Hello and welcome to the EdTech Podcast. I'm Philippa Wraithmell, and in this week's episode we're diving into one of the most urgent issues facing education, families and technology leaders right now. How we keep children safe in an online world that is changing faster than most systems can respond. Across the globe, conversation is shifting. International guidance now makes it clear that children's rights must be protected in digital spaces just like they are offline, and that safeguarding can no longer sit with just schools or parents alone. The expectation is increasingly that platforms, policymakers, educators and families all share the responsibility. And we see that thinking running through documents such as UN's Rights of the Child, focusing on children's rights in digital environments, UNICEF's work on child safety online, OECD's guidance on digital safety by design, and UNESCO's guidance on generative AI in education. And finally, Ofcom's ongoing research into children's real online experiences. In practice, that means that moving beyond simply telling children to be careful, it means understanding the full picture of online risk, from contact, content, conduct, and commerce. Through to the newer concerns around algorithmic amplification, emotional dependency on chatbots, misinformation, exploitative design and AI-generated harmful material. UK statutory safeguarding guidance for school reflects that broader approaches, and globally we're seeing the same message being repeated. Safeguarding in the digital age must be proactive, shared and designed in from the start. And that's exactly what today's conversation is all about. In this episode, I'm joined by Mubina Asari from LGFL, whose work supports school governors, teachers and parents with practical online safety guidance, and Al-Medina Lara from Ofcom, who's helping shape the UK's regulatory response through the Online Safety Act. Together we explore what safer digital futures could and should look like, from regulation and risk assessment to parent-school partnerships, AI risk, age assurance, school policy, and the everyday conversations that help children navigate their lives online with greater confidence and protection. This is a thoughtful, honest, and deeply relevant discussion, not just for those in the UK, but for educators, school leaders, and families everywhere trying to make sense of online life in a more connected, more complex, and more AI-shaped world. Welcome to the EdTech Podcast. We have Al-Medina and we have Mubina. Would you like to introduce yourselves and tell the podcast audience from all over the world who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Philippa. Delighted to be here. I'm Mubina Asari from LGFL. I'm part of the safeguarding team. We are a charity that works with schools across the country. So we provide training and support around safeguarding and online harms to teachers and governors. We develop policy guidance, curriculum resources, and support for parents and carers around online safety as well.
So you sound like a very busy company and a very busy lady. Al-Medina.
Hi everybody. My name is Al-Medina Lara and I am the director responsible for child online safety at Ofcom. Ofcom is the online safety regulator here in the UK, and our role is implementing the Online Safety Act. And prior to coming to Ofcom, I've been working in the space of child safety for many years. So I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
So being right at the forefront there, Al-Medina, of what is really happening right now, you just mentioned the Online Safety Act. Ofcom are heavily involved in that, as well as obviously an awful lot of other things. How do, just to start off, to give the audience a bit of scope, how did that all come about, and what was the real focus and impetus behind it all?
So the debate around the Online Safety Act started many years ago. It's coming now to 8 years, and part of the impetus behind was that it started to be obvious that there were risks associated with children in particular using online services. I think that we had been, prior to that, it had been a bit of an era of naivete, maybe like a lack of understanding of the risks. And here in the UK, we had a case of the tragic death of a girl called Molly Russell, that the coroner, following some investigation, realized that she had been exposed to very harmful content online, and that really sparked a debate about what's the role of online and how exposed children are to harmful content and harmful experiences. So that was the spark behind that Online Safety Act. Unfortunately, then it took many, many years for the act to become law. And then as part of that law, Ofcom was appointed as the regulator in charge of implementing the act. So that's where we come into play. So our role is to translate that legislation into clear expectations of services and to hold services to account for ensuring that children get safer and more age-appropriate experiences online.
Yeah, I think it's so tragic that we have to have such an experience like that for it to get to the point where people have to do something about it. Mabina, what sorts of support does LGFL do to help kind of schools, to help raise awareness of these things in line with the Act, I guess, to some extent? Because whilst we wait for things like that, I guess your company is someone who is at a precipice to be able to actually do something, whereas Ofcom being a regulator, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that school-parent partnership. And that's crucial when it comes to online safety. And we need to think about empowering teachers so that they can have those meaningful conversations with parents. But it's also about providing them with the confidence to deliver lessons in the curriculum so that they can help build those critical thinking skills in an age-appropriate way and help young people build their resilience to online harm as well.
I think when we talk about that resilience to online harm and awareness as well, that is the really tricky thing. I mean, statistics show us that statistics show us that parents actually believe that it's inevitable, isn't it, that their children are going to go on social media. So they allow them to go on before they potentially are ready or before the parent has felt confident enough to be ready. There's an awful lot of what I would call parental peer pressure, I think, a lot of the time, as well as normal peer pressure from our children's friends to themselves. How do you see things like that having an impact, and what sorts of things have been put in place to be able to help?
I think it's essential that parents are made aware of the risks that their child can be exposed to when they are online, giving fake ages underage, and the impact that this can really have on their safety and well-being. So the 4 C's of online safety is a really useful way to identify those online safety risks for children. So content, contact, conduct, and commerce. We know that algorithms can also target additional content similar to what they've accessed. Some of this can be harmful, inappropriate, or violent, and addictive algorithms can also make it harder for children to take a break from their screens and maintain that healthy balance between time on and offline. So it's really important that these messages are constantly reinforced by schools. I think a good way is to have a digital family agreement so that parents and children can sit down together. And rather than talking about ground rules, I think it's about having shared expectations of what children, but also parents need to model good behavior as well. They're constantly talking about their children and screen time. I remember going into a primary school to deliver a session, and a child actually came up to me and said, "I wish I was an iPhone so that my mother would talk to me." And that's very, very telling. And, we often hear of children saying how their parents are sharing photographs of their children online. They think it's harmless because it's a celebration, a birthday, but actually, are they asking for consent? And these are the messages that we really need to get through.
And I wonder, in terms of Ofcom, you must see, because of being a regulator, a lot of different angles from this. I'd be really interested to know what kind of questions you're getting, what sorts of support are you able to provide as a regulator?
So just building a bit on some of the themes that Mubina was developing there. I think that it is obviously very important that parents are part of the digital experience of children, and we need to work to empower them, to give them the language, to give them the understanding of the risks. Often we've carried some research as well, and it's often the case that the experiences of children is very different to the experience of the parents. So sometimes it is even hard for a parent to even start to understand what are the risks of these services. So when, for example, if a parent compares their experience of Instagram or TikTok with that of the child is much more likely to be exposed to violent content and to content that promotes suicide, self-harm, and eating disorders than an adult is. So understanding that is key to really start being able to be in a position to support your child. And Ofcom plays a key role through our media literacy and our research in showing these type of trends. But I also think that it is important that parents don't feel the guilt either, or like they play an important part in the safety of their children, but they are not alone, and it shouldn't be on them to keep children safe without any wider support. So part of the role of Ofcom is to make sure that services deliver age-appropriate experiences and safe experiences for young users. And up until now, and I know this well, I was working in the sector before coming to Ofcom, and I know well that companies were not treating children as children. They were just assuming that they were adults and giving them exactly the same type of access online. And we need to shift that. The responsibility needs to be very squarely on companies to deliver safer experiences for children online. And if they don't, and if they can't, then they shouldn't be serving children, because serving children is not a right, it's a privilege. And they need to earn it by demonstrating that they can keep them safe while using that service.
I think I couldn't agree more. It's vital that if, as you say, if they're going to offer that they have the safeguards in place. It's the same as if we were bringing technology into a school, we would check to make sure that it was a safe, secure, age-appropriate system. So what kinds of things are we able to do now? What are we asking of edtech companies, or technology companies, not even edtech companies, likes of Instagram? I mean, I have a whole question as well on the side of how is it possible that the algorithms are different because of the younger age of the children is horrifying. But how are we able to hold them account? What are we able to ask of them now?
So for a start, there are some categories of content that if the company allows that type of content, like violent content that is hateful or promotes eating disorders or self-harm, that those services need to implement age assurance, which is what we call, they basically need to have age checks in place to know if someone is a child, because the law is very clear that children should not be accessing that type of content. Pornographic content being another clear category of content that we know up until now children have been able to access from very early on and with really very little barriers. So they need to block children through an age check from accessing that content. And Ofcom is working with companies to ensure that they are implementing these checks effectively. And if they run an algorithm, what we are saying is that that algorithm should not contain those harmful content categories. So the companies need to take that content out and not be promoting that content directly to children, because the evidence is very clear that exposure to harmful content often happens through the algorithm. So it's not a child looking for this harmful content because they want to learn something or they want to explore a particular theme that might be risky. Actually, the first exposure to that type of content often comes from the algorithm without them looking for it. And the paths to it are often slightly serendipitous in that you might be looking for a routine for exercise, and very quickly through the algorithm you end up with themes of extreme thinness and themes of extreme exercise that are completely wrong for a child and that should not be promoted to them. So that those are two of the main things that we are now holding companies to account: the age checks and the safety of their algorithm.
And that's going to make a huge difference. I guess on the flip side of that, Vina, do you have insights into what that looks like on the ground? Like when you're in schools with students, are they seeing an effect? Are they seeing a change?
When it comes to pupils in schools, teachers play a huge role, firstly in the curriculum, but I wanted to say a little bit about the role with parents, first of all, if I may, because when I've spoken to a number of teachers across the board, safeguarding leads, there are varied levels of confidence when it comes to having those conversations. And even before those conversations take place, I think the biggest challenge they face is getting parents to come in to talk about online safety. Often, you will organize a big event and only 4 or 5 parents will come. And those are the ones that probably know everything anyway. So when I do speak to schools, I do give a lot of, there's several creative ways to engage parents. They can piggyback off other events such as parent evenings or coffee evenings where parents are there. There was one idea a school gave me, which was that the entry fee to the Year 6 disco was that the parents had to attend a parent online safety session. There was one school, one year they only had 5 parents. And so the following year where they had the nativity play, they spoke about online safety for 10 minutes. And so it was a win-win. Everyone was there. So it's about being creative, having that drip feed approach, getting pupils involved as well. I think research shows that when children take part and present alongside parents, parents are more likely to attend. And really, we should be tapping into their knowledge. They have first-hand insight into the apps, into the games, into the latest trends that are happening. Lots of schools also hold virtual sessions for parents that can't attend. You could have a dedicated area on your website where parents can then access the videos or the guides or the resources. And there are also lots of opportunities across the school calendar years. For example, in October, you've got Hate Crime Awareness Week. In November, you've got Anti-Bullying Week. We've got Safer Internet Day coming up in February. So these are different opportunities where you can talk about different areas throughout the year around online safety. In terms of managing those conversations and empowering families, I think it's about the key is providing those safe spaces for discussion, not being judgmental, and so that parents can share their concerns and strategies together. They themselves come up with great ideas that they can share with other parents. I think practical demonstrations go down really well, how to set up parental controls and actually getting the students to lead those because they're so good with tech, that really brings more parents in and gets the children involved. They've had experiences with algorithms, with, strangers online, and they're able to share those scams, anything else that they've come across and discuss those with parents. So that's really, really relevant. And also I think, important to share tips around managing screen time, give them something to take back, useful resources, something to signpost them to so that they can refer to afterwards. And I think the key thing is really just reminding parents they're not meant to be experts. They're not meant to be technical experts. They're parents. So ultimately, it's about communication. It's about having those regular conversations, about checking in, and really just making sure that they're involved in their children's lives.
And I think that's so important from such a young age as well, because actually we start to build almost a barrier, don't we? Right from the beginning, almost when we first hand over what may seemingly be an innocent tablet device or anything like that, without having those initial conversations with our children, we're almost putting a block in our way of then having further conversations with them.
Absolutely.
So when we put together the rules that we expect services to follow, we did so on the back of very extensive research with children and with parents and carers that told us about their experience. And we have a system at Ofcom to continue to track how those experiences are evolving as we implement the legislation. And that is really important because we are very aware that companies will come to talk to us and will tell us that they have implemented this change or that change and that they are doing very fancy things to keep children safe online. But at the end of the day, the real question is, how is that experience changing? And do children feel safer when they are online or not? So in addition to working with services and understanding what they are doing to keep children safer, we are also talking extensively to children and to parents to understand how their experience is evolving as a result of the implementation of the Act.
That's so good to hear, because I think it's really important, isn't it, not just to take it from prior to the Act, but actually to see how well it is going and how much it's being embedded. I guess one of my worries or one of my thoughts around that, is just if there's too much information, are parents then getting overwhelmed and confused? Or in fact, even the opposite? Do they know where to find these things? Are they reading the information and finding that support?
Uvina, I don't know whether you want to take that. I have some thoughts as well. As a parent and as a professional, I think it can be quite overwhelming. And things change rapidly as well. So it's keeping up with all the risks, all the new services, all the different ways in which children are experiencing those services, the new trends. Is just really hard to keep on top of it. Letting to one side as well the changing political debate about whether we should allow children on social media or not, etc. So it's just, if you want to keep on top of it, I tell you, I'm working in this space and I'm a mom as well. And it is really hard even for people working in this space. But I think that there are some basics of safeguarding that work regardless of the complexity, which is just be curious and just be open and create the space where children can actually have those conversations with you. So we have statistics about how often do parents talk to children about online safety. And sadly, it's very infrequent. And what safeguarding tells you is that you need to be constantly talking about these issues and creating the opportunities for children to come to you and say, this has happened to me. And I think in that also you need to share about your own experiences and also be willing to talk about your own vulnerabilities when you are online. As a bit like Mubina was saying about the leading by examples, even though it is a very complex space, when you boil it down, there is also some simple messages to parents, which is about show curiosity, be open-minded and be there for your child and talk.
I wonder whether that's the idea, though, that because a lot of us as parents didn't grow up having a lot of technology and having those conversations, obviously a lot of our parenting as well is modelled often on what we did or didn't like as teenagers and children ourselves from our own parents, and actually not knowing how to start some of those conversations, that fear of not knowing, of looking silly, or maybe they know more than us. There's always that'll come up a lot within different discussions around children and families, is they know more than me, I can't answer their questions. And it is that sitting down and actually let's just have a look together. Or, you know what, I'm Mum, I'm going to ask a silly question. Just kind of humour me, isn't it? I mean, I've got an 11 and a 15-year-old, so I'm right in the middle of it where we have these conversations, but sometimes they are tricky. But I wonder whether do you think that might be also a bit of a barrier, is that confidence of parents?
I've spoken to so many parents and carers, and I totally resonate with Almudena as a mother and as an educator, both sides. It is overwhelming, and sometimes it's that confidence of how to start the conversation and also, having the answers to tricky questions as well. And I think that's where the parent-school collaboration is so important. Schools are there to support and support them. That will really, really help.
Yeah, it's vital, isn't it? And we've touched upon it slightly, Almudena. You brought this up around the social media, potentially raising that age limit. We've seen it in other countries. From some of the news reports I've personally read, we've also seen the parental support of their own children hacking, for want of a better word, the system. How do you feel that will be perceived? How well will it go? How do you see that supporting the overall goals of obviously just keeping children safe?
Yes. So obviously it's great to have a life experiment going on in another country that we can gain experience from, because also there is a live debate here in the UK as we go about implementing the Online Safety Act. There is a parallel debate about introducing a social media ban like the Australians have done and like the French are considering now. And I think that we just need to wait and see how that works in practice. I think it's very early on. They only introduced this at the beginning of December. And we are talking about big societal changes here that do require a big rewiring of the way that children and parents go about doing things. So we are working as Ofcom very closely with our Australian counterparts to learn from that experience. I personally think that when we talk about social media, different people have different things in mind, and different people have different things that they worry about these services. So I wonder whether part of it is better to talk about what are the risky functionalities that we are concerned about. Is it about the infinite scrolling and the impact that that has on addiction? Is it about the content that children are being recommended through the personalized feed? Is it about the network expansion that allows them to be in touch with strangers? So I think that there are many component parts to the digital experience of children, and different people are worried about different things. One of the concerns with the Australian ban, for example, is that in defining social media, there are some services that are captured by the ban, but there are other services like gaming services that are not captured by the bans. Actually, their children can move to gaming services and maybe they are less safe in those services. So I think we need to have a holistic understanding of what's the experience of the child and root it very much on the experience of the child. That's why I said, and I think it is so important to understand from children themselves, how do they go about using these services. But also, like, I know as well that they'll find workarounds any ban. The challenge will also be about how do you make sure that if the rules are that they shouldn't be accessing certain services, that actually those are implemented correctly.
Yeah.
I think following on from what Almudena said, we really need to look at this through a social lens, because it's not just about technology, it's ultimately about behavior. Technology will change, but it's how we use it and how we can safeguard children. And it can be overwhelming, now with AI and new trends happening. That's why I think it's really, really important to empower parents and empower teachers to have those conversations. And in order to keep up with the trends and all the risk, it isn't easy. So to help, we've actually developed a ready-to-use presentation, ready-to-use PowerPoint for schools, community groups and youth centres, anyone working with children. And it's got discussion starters, activities, prompts, tips on all the latest trends, settings and guidance that schools can deliver to parents and have those conversations. And I think with those prompts, I think it will give them that confidence to explore these themes in a more meaningful way.
And those different things are the kind of the ammunition that schools really require to be able to support parents through that. I mean, we talk about it being a social and behavioural change. It's an awful lot of work parents probably will also need to be doing themselves to look inwardly and think, am I, as we mentioned earlier, modelling best, like the good practice? Am I showing my children what I want them to do? If they're not allowed to all of a sudden have social media or have technology or the bans of things, then what am I suggesting to them that my technology use looks like? Are there lots of resources to help parents to reflect on that as well?
Yeah, and there are some great resources, Internet Matters, ChildNet, CEOP, PSHE Association. We've got a few at LGFL. There's a wealth of information out there, quality assured, to guide parents in an age-appropriate way. And I think it's really just about raising awareness so that they have these tools to hand to support them.
Absolutely. So in terms of things like frameworks and policies, how closely as companies, as obviously there's the regulator, I should say, and then a company, do you work together to make sure that you are fully supporting everybody who's involved within the scenario?
So we work very closely with companies to understand their services, to understand the risks. One of the things that we've asked in the early stages of the implementation of the Online Safety Act is that services need to conduct a risk assessment, a comprehensive assessment of all the risks that their service present to children and users more widely. And for some of the largest and riskiest services, we have received those risk assessments and have gained quite a lot of insight into what are the services like and how they operate and how they think and manage those risks themselves. But I think that we need to work, as Mubina was saying, very holistically. So we as a regulator, our job is to hold services and companies to account, but that needs to be very much rooted on what's the experience of children and of parents and of schools as well, and what's the role that the different component parts play. But what I often use is the analogy of road safety as well when we talk about online safety, which is, I think that sometimes the emphasis is put on teaching children or teaching parents how to understand the risks and how to navigate this very dangerous and convoluted road that has been put in front of them. So what I see as my role as the regulator is to make sure that that road is built with safety in mind, that the lights are in the right place, that the signs are correct, and that actually it's built in a way that actually has the safety of the users in mind, because it doesn't matter how much you teach the child or the parent. If you haven't built for safety, then they won't be safe.
I wonder as well with that, how much you are able to really hold companies to account. What is the real scenario around if those companies are not building things safely and effectively, and for instance, they disregard your communications around identifying certain areas that they deliver information on or share content on, for instance, abusive images, or as we've said already, things like eating disorders, etc. To what extent are we able to do something about those people?
Yes, so we have extensive powers as a regulator. Obviously, like those, we need to be certain and be able to demonstrate that services are not following the rules and are failing, and that's part of our role, is to amass that evidence if we have concerns about how services are behaving. If it is clear that they haven't met their requirements, we can fine them up to 10% of their global revenue, which is a huge fine that we can impose on them. In the extreme as well, we can apply to the courts for business disruption measures. Those measures would require a court to give an order for the service to be blocked from the UK. For repeat offenders, for services that actually don't want to comply with the system and are overtly non-compliant, we can actually apply to the courts to have them blocked from operating in the UK.
Which is amazing. And obviously you mentioned there the UK. Are you able to, and you mentioned also earlier that you're working closely with Australia to see what's happening there. Are you able to then share that information almost as a kind of, I want to say like a blacklist of, look, we've had to just go through this. People may well be aware, it may well be in the press, etc. But almost to say, look, this is somebody to watch out for. They are caught.
So, I mean, subject to all the obvious confidentialities of any live case and investigations, I think we share some intelligence about where we see concerns in the performance of some of these companies. And it's always very useful to have a coordinated approach when it comes to the holding of companies to account, and also in the setting of the rules, because we are talking mainly about global companies that operate in many jurisdictions. And one of the things that make it hard when it comes to implementing the rules is that if you have a very fragmented set of rules, then companies may actually either ignore them or go for the lowest common denominator and try to actually not necessarily adapt their services to your requirements. But we are very clear to any company that is operating in the UK that the UK rules are the UK rules. And if they want to serve children and adults in the UK, they need to comply with this set of regulation.
Which is brilliant. Mubina, when we look at then the technology that's being used in schools, and while some of that is not necessarily social media, although many schools have social media accounts, how are they being able to deal with that at like trust level, board levels, senior leadership, safeguarding levels?
Is that a conversation that's happening in schools?
Yes, and I think it's really important that schools think about their policies and their practices. There is guidance for schools in keeping children safe in education. So, that is outlined to support them. We also provide template online safety policies for schools to help them make these decisions and think about, their next steps that they can then customize. We also develop acceptable user agreements as well. So these are individual ones for pupils, for different key stages, for teachers, for governors, for staff, for visitors, so that everyone could be mindful of their roles and their responsibilities. But I think the online safety policy is really, really critical in terms of determining the school's policy and its stance.
To build on that, it's obviously a very rapidly changing policy space, I think, and the expectations are constantly changing. Only, I think it's this week that the government in the UK has issued some guidance as well for schools on the use of mobile phones and the role of the Ofsted, the school inspector, in implementing that policy. And I think that a year ago would have been unheard of. I remember the first time I went to visit my children's secondary school, that it was like a good selling point that they had a very open policy on use of mobile phones. And the whole ethos was around teaching children how to use the mobile phone in a constructive way and how to interact with it. And I remember that all of them had reminders on the mobile phone and the school calendar on their mobile phones. So they were actually constantly using the mobile phone in the school. And now, only a few years later, that is absolutely not a selling point in terms of a school policy. And we are looking at being much stricter about the use of mobile phones in educational settings. But I think the important thing with that, sorry if I can finish that thought,
Absolutely.
is that by removing mobile phones from the educational settings, what we should make sure is that we don't remove the conversation about online safety from the educational settings, because there is a bit of a risk that with mobile phones out of sight, people think, well, that's not my responsibility, that's for the parents and the educators to do at home. But the reality is that children live in a world where the online and the offline world is all merged, and you can, much as you might try to ban the use of mobile phones in schools, and I think that that's probably a good policy, you shouldn't forget that children remain using online services when they are out of the school premises, and that we need to really educate them and empower them to do that safely.
Yeah, I think that's the critical role of education. I think even with parental restrictions, it's the same concept. If you ban something, a child might access it at a friend's house, on a gaming device elsewhere, in a Starbucks, through a different Wi-Fi. So those conversations really, really need to take place across the board.
Yeah. And equally, children, yes, aren't using them maybe perhaps at school, but they are using them to get home, on their way home. Many of them, depending on where they live, have quite a journey. And it's that assumption that because we've banned them from one place, that would be when it all stops. But actually, oftentimes we now see, and I see this when I go in and out of schools here in the Middle East, is heads down and children not looking anywhere and actually causing more problems because they're so engrossed in this phone that they've not had access to all day. I wonder how children feel around that. What are the conversations that you've had about, how they feel? Because many children that I speak to will have a differing opinion, but there is the other half of them that go, but we use it really well. And as you've just mentioned really nicely, it's about me planning my day, me knowing where my homework is, attaching myself to my Google Classroom. I'm learning skills for life. This is a tool in my pocket, and taking those things away from everybody instead of reinforcing, especially if you consider the idea that, okay, well, if we took social media out of the picture and you said, okay, they've got a device, what are the conversations that children are having of why that would be a problem? If you're taking my distraction section away from me, where are we going there?
I've had conversations with schools where phones have not been allowed. And actually, a lot of the children, surprisingly, have expressed the view that they found it a lot more helpful. They've been able to concentrate during the day. They've been able to interact as well. And it hasn't really bothered them. So, I don't think that we should be expecting a big reaction. A lot of children in schools have, we've had a very positive reaction to this.
I agree with that. I think reacting, Philippa, to your question, I think that the difficulty now is that it's very difficult to separate the problematic use maybe of social media, or how some children might be drawn to using excessively social media from the phone, because the phone contains it all together. So even though it has some useful things in terms of the school day, like Google, like whatever classroom application you use, or your calendar, or access to resources, the reality is that some children would then get distracted by the social media or by other gaming services in the device. So it's difficult to separate at the moment. But the reality is that children love technology. And that is something that we just need to be wary of, like an alert to the fact that we can't remove it all, because technology is here to stay. Technology is part of everybody's everyday life. And there are a lot of really good things to celebrate from technology. We hear about children that live in very isolated communities that get access to resources that they would never have access to if it was not because of technology. Children that learn how to play an instrument or learn languages is just such a source for good. But also, obviously, there are some concerning aspects of it. I think that my hope is that we are able to remove some of those dangers from technology and make sure that children can have a healthy, happy use of technology where they benefit to the maximum.
Amazing. On that note, I guess as well, one of the questions that obviously is on everybody's lips is AI and how this has an impact on the consistent changing landscape of both the policy, but also on the ability to support schools. How are people dealing with that? How is, from a regulatory point of view, is that being dealt with? But also from the school side, how easy is it to be able to support them? Again, aside obviously from conversations, which are vital, as we know, there's lots of things happening because of the way we can distort things with AI. How is that having an effect?
We know that children and young people are being exposed to online harm with new generative AI tools, which are everywhere online now. These include sex bots, AI girlfriends, nudifying sites. AI can also create child sexual abuse material, posing serious risks for children. There's a lot of adult content that can be accessed from chatbots, so they can engage children in explicit adult conversations and make adult imagery available as well. And also a lot of inappropriate advice. Children turn to AI for advice, as one would search for advice, and chatbots can actually give very harmful advice. And, this has implications around safeguarding, mental health. There've been questions around dieting, physical appearance, and young people could be very, very vulnerable. There's also that exposure to harmful fake content, and there's the emotional impact of AI companions. So, these companions, AI friends, companions, they can replace those human interactions as well, and relationships, and risk harm to children's social and emotional well-being. So there are so many factors to consider. There's the bias reinforcing harmful stereotypes. There's the risks of also sharing your personal data online. I think, when you input that information, you don't know where it's going. So I think when it comes to awareness, it's really important that schools discuss the ethics around AI and the safeguarding considerations. And I think those conversations also need to take place with parents as well, so that they can support children at home, because it is everywhere now.
Absolutely. And I guess, again, coming down to that, needing parents to also have knowledge for themselves, because it's not just children that are going to find themselves getting misled or doing something or sharing something as well, because it's so new to all of us.
Yeah, and I think this is an area that a lot of parents have asked advice for, because when I did a survey, I had around 800 schools, and I asked them, what are the key areas that you're struggling with when it comes to talking to parents around online safety? The top one was AI. How to talk about AI, and that was followed by misinformation as well. So I think there's areas
they're quite
where
interlinked, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, we need to provide that support, that information, so they can have those informed conversations. And on the back of that, we've now developed resources specifically for parents, videos for them to watch, updating them on the guidance and the risks and the harms. And we've also incorporated that information into the parent presentation that parents can deliver to parents, so that they can be consistent in that messaging as well. So we're constantly trying to keep up with the trends and what parents are asking for, and trying to marry the two together.
Can I ask, in terms of an Ofcom perspective, do you see certain types of artificial intelligence being added to the guidance already?
Yeah. So when it comes to a chatbot or a generative AI capability that is part of a user-to-user services or a search services, which are the two categories of services that are in scope of the Act, those AI-powered services will also be covered by our powers. So in the same way that we expect other services to put protections around some of the harmful content that Mubina was talking about, we expect that irrespective of whether it's generated by a user or a Gen AI tool, that content is, like, children are protected from that content, whether it's adult pornographic content, whether it's content that promotes harmful themes, etc. And critically, what we expect is that when companies introduce these type of new services, that they carry out a proper risk assessment to understand what's the impact that service is going to have on children, and that actually put the right protections in place, including, if necessary, to restrict children from accessing that service if they can. So if we have a service that it's very easy to produce nude images or to access violent content, that service actually should not be available to children. And we know that some of the main Gen AI tools have protections in place, but we are working with them to understand a bit better how those protections are implemented in practice and make sure that the safety of children is at the forefront of how they go about designing their service. I think there is one topic that Mubina has talked about, like the emotional dependency of children from chatbots. That is a very interesting emerging harm that is not reflected in our powers or in the Act. But it also highlights how fluid this space is, and how technology changes, and how we go about interacting with technology also changes. And as regulators and as policymakers, we need to be always trying to keep ahead of these technological changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would wonder, in an ideal world, considering everything, what would a good regulated future look like? What would you both aspire to see for everybody in order to have some sort of balance between everything? What would the future look like?
I'm a firm believer that one of the things that the Online Safety Act got right is the emphasis on companies carrying out proper risk assessments and keeping those up to speed and up to date with the technological development. And the reason is because one cannot create rules that cover for all possible scenarios. Technology is changing too fast for that to be the case. If that's a losing game. So we need to really make sure that we put the responsibility on companies to think about risks and think about safety first. So for me, a good regulatory future, how it looks like, is for companies to have already incorporated in the way they go about running their business the safety of their users and the safety of children, and build that from the start. So from the beginning, when they are thinking about developing the new technology or chatbots or whatever it might be, they think about how am I going to keep children safe in this service, or is it at all a service that should be available to children? So making it part of the day-to-day business. I don't want to have to go with a stick every time they get things wrong. I think I'd rather they got them right from the beginning.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Mobina is brilliant. And I think it's more conversations like this, more regulations, as we mentioned at the beginning, sadly, far too far after everything had already started, but we are now on that track. We're getting it right. We're starting to make the good decisions. And with that whole reflection as well, that we understand it's going to be incredibly iterative. And I think it's more of these conversations that are going to really help to bring everyone else along and to build that change that's needed, isn't it? And with resources coming from all kinds of places, we will be mentioning them in the show notes. So please do have a look in there for any of the resources that have been noted today in the show. It has been absolutely delightful to have you both. Thank you so much for talking so candidly about everything.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the EdTech Podcast with me, Philippa Wraithmelt. What I really think stays with me from this episode is that online safety can no longer be treated as a side conversation, a one-off assembly, or a problem to solve only after harm has happened. The global evidence now points us to the same direction. Children benefit enormously from digital access, creativity and connection, but those opportunities must be matched by stronger systems, clearer expectation and safer design. UNICEF, OECD, UNESCO and the UN's Right for Child all point to the same principles, that children should not have to carry the burden of navigating unsafe systems by themselves. All of which is upheld by the work that Al-Medina has been doing at Ofcom and Mobina at LGFL. All here to support everyone. And for schools, that means online safeguarding is no longer about just filtering and monitoring. It's about culture, policy, curriculum, leadership, family engagement and design choices. It's about helping adults feel confident enough to have the conversation, even when they do not have every answer. It's about recognising that children's online and offline lives are now fully entwined, and increasingly it's about responding to a new layer of challenge brought by AI. From generated content and misinformation to synthetic relationships, manipulation, and entirely new forms of exploitation. UNESCO has warned that governments and institutions need to immediate policies, training and human-centred safeguards around generative AI, while Ofcom's research continues to show how important it is to ground all of this work in children's actual lived experiences. So perhaps a big takeaway at this is a better digital future for children will not come from fear alone. And it will not come from bans alone. It will come from shared responsibility, better regulation, safer products, informed schools, and engaged families in ongoing dialogue. So if this episode resonated with you, do take a look at the show notes, where we'll link some of the organisation's frameworks and resources mentioned in today's discussion. Thanks for listening to the EdTech Podcast. Please like, follow, and share so this episode can be heard by more, and we can be supported in growing our community.